Ross, you're in charge, so whenever you want to do any sort of introduction, get started, whatever, man.
Oh, shit. Okay, I didn't know we're treating this like education sessions. Yeah, I guess it makes sense.
Well, I made a PowerPoint because I didn't want to just sit here and ramble for like 10 minutes, and I was like, might as well just put a little structure to it.
Yeah, so kind of a quick side note. I think we're all kind of stuck indoors and probably looking for ways to socially interact. So we're doing a lot of different things, kind of keep things interesting and not just be us drinking over the internet. So a lot of things coming up in terms of presentations, but Vince and Doug have been kind enough to kind of jump in first and talk to us about Berliner Weisses, and they both had good success. You guys both got to the second round, correct, with your Berliner Weisses?
Doug won a medal with the Berliner. Was that 2 years ago, Doug?
Minnesota.
3 years ago. Yeah.
Yeah, 3 years ago. So and then last year I think you got to it in the final round with the Berliner. I had a fruit beer, and I made it to mini best of show, and shit happens. But so, anyways.
Yeah. So that's the introduction, and they're going to talk to us about Berliner Weisses.
Yep. So like I said, or like Ross said, we're stuck inside and have nothing to do. So I've made some slides. And I'm just kind of hoping this will help structure the talk a little more and make it a little more useful so people don't have to like feverishly writing shit down. But, feel free to interrupt, or, there's some details in here that like maybe I don't have experience in and somebody else does, feel free to fill in the blanks. So obviously Doug and I are going to be giving the talk. So here's just these are kind of the topics that I kind of pulled out from the Slack channel that I was going to talk about, or we were going to talk about like our recipes, where we get the lacto from, process, how we sour, to boil or not to boil, don't boil, what types of yeast and Brett, how to fruit, dry hopping, packaging and serving and cleaning. So that's kind of the general overview. So these are our two recipes, and I was like, because I asked Doug for his recipe, so I was super happy that like ours actually lined up pretty well. So mine is, it seems to be a pretty higher ABV than Doug's. Mine's around like 4.5, and Doug's is like, he didn't give me a final gravity, but I'm assuming it's like
3.8, something like that.
Yeah, I guess I never factor in what the fruit adds, so like I have no idea, but I don't know if Doug does that at all. But
3.8, you said?
Around 3.8 for me, and then I don't really. I just know it's in that ballpark. So when I add fruit, I'm not trying to get a final. I just know it's, going to hunker around 4, 3.8, something like that.
Yeah. So, I think both of us are about, it's like I said, it's like, almost half and half of pills and wheat malt. And then I use flaked wheat and acid, and Doug uses some oats and foam. I'm kind of curious about the oats decision, Doug, if you had any reason for that.
Yeah, that's a good question. This is my champion. The reason I got into Berliner Weisse. Can't see myself, but
up a little.
Okay.
There you go.
So I found this at Craft Beer Cellar, and I had this in DC maybe 8 years ago at Church Key. The waiter was just like, or the bartender's like, oh, you guys are into sours, you should try this one. It's a Berliner Weisse by Bandershoff, whatever, the Leipzig. So we tried it, and it was life-changing. And ever since then, I wanted to brew it. And I didn't realize by my research back then that it had oats in it. And now on the can, it actually says brewed in the tradition of Berliner Weisse beer, but it also says with oats. So this is my 8th generation of this recipe, and it's the first time I've used oats.
Yeah. And Doug also, and he can send it out later, his award-winning Berliner Weisse is actually posted on the Yeast Bay's website because he used their lacto blend and I believe their Brett. So if you're interested in that one too, you can get it. Yeah, so pretty simple recipe. So I don't think there's
quick question, or 2 questions. I guess one is that flaked oats, Doug, and why the addition of flaked wheat in addition to the white wheat, Vince?
So when I used to do this, like my original recipe was literally half pills, half flaked wheat, and I have no idea why. And then last year, when I made it to final round, I was trying to think of ways to, because I knew my fruiting was like mine. So the way I do mine is it's raspberry and cherry. So it's not really exotic fruiting. So I knew I wasn't going to be able to like really compete with some of the more exotic fruits. So I really had to hone in. And I had, I drunkenly bought half a sack of white wheat, split half a sack of white wheat with Phil, or maybe it was JSAP or somebody. I don't remember. I like agreed to do it. So I had all this fucking white wheat around, and I was reading about it, and it just seemed like it kind of gave a little more wheat flavor and kind of was a little less proteiny. But I still wanted to keep some of that like flaked wheat body and some of the haze that it provides. But you might just be able to remove it. I honestly have no idea. So it's just that's where I am at in my evolution. And the acid I put there, I don't know if Doug pre-acidifies, is mostly to get the original pH of the of it down a little. So when you kind of throw the lacto in, it kind of has a head start.
Are you trying more acid, a lower pH than for a normal beer, or is it just due to your water?
Yeah, so I think they because so it's 5%, but this is a pretty low gravity beer. Yeah, you're supposed to. I don't know. There is like people say like you should try and get it down to like 4.3 or something, but I never get it that low.
Yeah, 4.5.
Yeah.
It helps with head retention, and it takes out any of the botulism type issues, and but mainly it helps with head retention. If you can get it down to 4.5 before you hit it with the lacto, is what the research is showing.
And that's post mash, right? So are you mashing it like say 5.3, 5.4, 5.2, and then bringing it down after mash to 4.5?
Yeah, exactly. It'll naturally reduce just through the mash, but then I take a reading and I bring it down to at least, I try to get it to the 4.5, and then I pitch the lacto.
Yeah, I have done that in the past, but I don't really do that right now. And I think another thing about that, which I think is maybe the next or some of the other slides, is like some of the lactose strains that are becoming more popular are actually able to sour a lot quicker, and so it's kind of a moot point. But so that's actually this side. So there's like tons of other lacto, and like I wouldn't like, I don't know, like just go on Milk the Funk about this, like really. But these are kind of the most common ones. So the Del Brocai, I don't know how to pronounce it. That's kind of the traditional strain. That one's like a lot slower than some of the other ones. So it's better to co-pitch it with yeast. So it will, if you just pitch it by itself, it's known for getting other infections because it doesn't kick off quick enough to start getting the pH down for others. Additionally, kind of that poopy flavor, that there's some research that shows that poopy flavor that people associate with kettle sours is because the Del Brocai actually doesn't play well with oxygen. On the other hand, the other two, which you'll kind of see, I think are the ones that Doug and I use the most, are Plantarum, which is found in Good Belly. It's a really quick, clean sour. It works at lower temperatures, so you don't need to keep it high, and it's relatively oxygen tolerant. And then Brevis, which I don't use as much as Doug, is another quick sour. It does pre-create more lactic acid than Plantarum and De Brocai. Works at low temperature, and there's also some research on that oxygen actually helps it grow. And there's this other one that I've been reading about, thinking of using. I haven't used it yet. It's in a lot of probiotic pills called Rhamnosus, but I just don't have very much information on that one. And there's I want to also say, like, there's a bunch of other strains within each one of these. So I think the blend that Doug uses has like 3 or 4 different strains of Plantarum in it. I'm not sure.
Yeah, it has I think 2 Brevis and 1 Plantarum in it. So
yeah, but yeah,
butting in here, guys. The Weisse lactose strain, or at least one of them, is supposedly a Brevis, but it's also heterofermentative, so it will make alcohol along with the lactic acid, so it can attenuate the beer all by itself.
Yeah, I've never used any of the, because I have that. There's a bunch of different I don't know if it's the Weisse 4335, but I've never tried doing a pure lacto ferment. I don't know. so I can't
Yeah.
speak to that.
I did it. It actually it didn't get very sour. It was like a really restrained sourness.
But you
and I
do
ended
see a
up
carousing on that.
What was the yeast you just mentioned that you first mentioned?
One of the YE. So if you go on Milk the Funk and just search Milk the Funk lactobacillus, they have an entire table that tells which ones are fermentation and or whatever, and the other one where, and anything that's hetero can fully ferment it. But I think you need to do a pretty large pitch. I don't know. I haven't done that. So Matt, if you've done it, you can speak to it.
Yeah, I did a lager scale starter with it, and I actually didn't like how low the tartness was with it, and I ended up adding black currant juice to make it more sour. So, yeah.
So here's just kind of some lists of lactose sources. Once again, there's Milk the Funk has a really good resource for commercial ones. So I tend to use Good Belly probiotics. I use the Sure Shots. I believe DT has used just the regular carton and had success with that. That is 100% Lactobacillus plantarum. Doug swears by the Yeast Bay Lacto Blend, but I once used the Omega Lacto Blend. They're both plantarum and brevis, and then there's a couple others. I think Matt, didn't you sour something with yogurt once? I've never soured with yogurt.
So I did a side-by-side where I made small starters and tried a few things. I tried yogurt. I tried a commercial lacto, which I think was that same yeast. I tried sauerkraut, and I tried a sourdough starter. The sauerkraut was pretty awful, but I think it's because the starter still kind of tasted like cabbage. And I ended up from that I ended up picking a sourdough starter as my favorite, and that's another one where there's a blend of all kinds of things in there, and it was able to attenuate the beer on its own, and it got a nice balanced level of sourness. And I tried to repitch that a couple times, and it just changed too much with each generation. So by like the third beer I made with it was not very.
Yeah. So, and then the old standby was using just kind of like grab a fistful of grain and throw it in there. And I actually did that once. It was the very first Berliner I ever made. And I luckily dodged any bullets associated with that. And so here's just some lactose sources. So that on the upper left-hand corner is actually when I did my grain soured. So the recommendations are you soak it in star san. It, I guess, doesn't kill the lacto on there. But kills other stuff. And so I did that and just stupidly just threw it straight in the kettle and it worked out. But typically with that, you probably want to do a starter. I think Doug does a starter for the lactobacillus blend. I don't know, Doug.
Yeah, I use, I grow it up in a DME starter. So just a normal beer starter, put the lacto in there. And yeah, obviously with lacto, you don't have to worry about oxygen, so you don't have to put it on a spin plate, or you could have it on really low if you do it that way. But yeah, it just grows up without needing oxygen like our traditional sack and Brett yeast do.
Yeah, and the nice thing if you're doing grains or like something else that might be a little crazier, like sourdough and stuff like that, is that you can try it before putting it in the beer, just in case it does develop some sort of weird off flavors or infection or whatever. The Good Bellies, if you do 2 of the probiotics straight into the fermenter, you're good for 5 gallons. And I think DT can chime in on this, but I believe the carton is about half a carton per 5 gallons, but I'm not fully sure.
Yeah, you supposedly don't need much of the Good Belly like carton. But I actually like it, and I don't think flavor really comes across, so you can use the entire fucking carton.
Yeah, so people always suggest Matt just left, but a lot of people online suggest using the mango Good Belly. And
is it like Buffett? Fell over?
If you have background noise, can you please mute yourself? So if there's any talking in the background, that's fine. Just throw yourself on mute.
If you do use the mango Good Belly, just remember to note if you submit it to a competition, I usually note it in the title and in the notes to the organizer that there could be trace amounts of mango in it. Additionally, if you bring it to one of our meetings, make sure to note that. Matt Dirks, our president, has a mango allergy. Other people have it. It's an allergen, so you should just make sure to kind of, just be aware of that. So that's the flavor. For whatever reason, people suggest to use, and I use it, but I've used other ones. I don't know what DT used. I've used blueberry, regular, and I think like ginger. And I, like he said, I got no flavor out of it.
Yeah, I used mango. I used the blueberry, raspberry, or something, and a bunch of the fruit ones. And I've never gotten. The only time I got a little bit of flavor, as I think I used 2 cartons in a 3-gallon batch. I also dry hopped it, so it also kind of tasted blueberry-ish.
Yeah, so I mean, yeah, because so the cartons, or at least the Sure Shots, are they're like 2 ounces each. So you're adding 4 ounces for 5 gallons, so it's not going to do much. But just being aware of the allergens, I think, is important.
Hey, question. You talked about doing a starter. If I'm making yogurt, I know I need to keep it warmer than room temperature. If you're doing a starter with one of these, do you have to keep it warm?
I have. Doug, what do you do?
I just do it at room temp, but do a starter.
I don't think you have to. I think that it's preferred. Obviously, lacto grows better with higher heat, but you don't need to.
Yeah.
Another thing too that I've found is that lacto doesn't flocculate. So if you want to bank this stuff, it's tough to do because it doesn't flock out.
Yeah.
Are you telling me that none of you people know a place to get quart-sized centrifuges?
Shaker table, man.
I can centrifuge a quart for you at work, but it's going to be in 50 ml increments.
Tie a rope around your flask and swing it over your head.
Yeah. So
I have a question. Did you just say earlier that Star San doesn't kill the lacto?
I mean, for whatever reason, and this is 5 years ago at this point. I was reading about how to do it online, and somebody suggested soaking the grains, or somebody insisted, I'm sure, wherever the fuck I was reading this, that you soak the grains in Star San and then put in. And so that's what I did. And, it soured up fine. And so I am not speaking from a place of science. I'm speaking from a place of that's what I did once and I've never done it again. Because I think DT or somebody told me oh, you should just use Good Belly. It's a lot easier. And I was like, oh, okay, that seems easier.
I think Star San does kill lactose though, doesn't it? I mean, that's from what I've known.
I mean, it seems like it should, but I don't know. Maybe it just doesn't penetrate the grains enough. And maybe I'm misremembering something. I don't know, but that photo, I was soaking it in something. I don't know what.
So do you all find that the Good Belly gives you consistent results? Because that's something that I was thinking about. It's not made to be a fermentation organism. It's made as a probiotic. So I don't know how viable it is, how consistent.
I actually think that it is. I mean, I can't speak to the yeast, the lactobacillus blend, but I think it's going to be almost more consistent than some of when you buy yeast from, White Labs or wherever it is, they're a yeast lab, as opposed to a Good Belly probiotic has to be approved by the FDA. So it has a lot higher standards of getting it onto the shelf and validating the claims that are made on it. I think I've had very consistent results with it. But I also feel that I think it has less complexity than what you get out of some of the brewing lactobacilluses, the different variants of brevis and stuff like that. So I think that when Doug's made his, I feel like it has a more complex lactobacillus character than the ones I make with just Good Belly.
I don't think pitching rate matters that much with lacto because it grows so fast, and right, the pitching rate doesn't really change the acid levels, right? It's I think it's the strain more than anything.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the thing about pitching levels, I think I think it won't change the aspect, but it'll make it faster. And like you want to sour it as fast as possible to avoid any contamination. And I also think a lot of the knowledge that we have about lacto, that is kind of like the gold standard gatekeeper language that people use, is all based off of the really classic Del Bruckei strain, which is just a different beast. Like as you said, like it doesn't need to be hot anymore. Like you could make it at 70 degrees and it'll get sour.
Yeah, I also think that like the faster you can drop that pH, the quicker other things won't have a chance to get in there, right? So
yeah, I think that's the main thing of why you want to go higher. So this is just the general process. It's very simple. I mash at like 148. I don't know what Doug does. And then drain it out. I heat it I used to heat it higher to like 180 or even just boiling. But I read somewhere that SMM, which I don't know what it stands for, some of the scientists might, or I don't remember, which is the precursor to DMS, starts forming at 176. So if you keep it lower than that, you're still going to clean it up, kill most of the things, but not have that risk. But once again, I've never had DMS in this. Cool to around. Yeah, go ahead, Doug.
I was just going to say I've never gone even that high. I've just brought it up to about 175 for mash out. Other than that, I'm around 150, 152 for the primary mash.
Yeah. So, that's, people say you should, heat it up to kill it. It's one of those things that I am finding less and less needed. And as Doug's kind of saying, you might not need it at all.
Is the no sparge related to the souring, or just because you like to do no sparge?
I do it just because it's such a small beer that there's really no reason to sparge it, in my opinion. I don't know what Doug does.
Well, I just had to, do a higher temp sparge out just to get the liquor off the wort off the grain, and just to have a little bit higher temperatures to help get it through the grains and out into the primary fermentation vessel.
Yeah. So I've also done this brew in a bag as well, Dave. So, and then go ahead,
Doug. When you say you sparge, are you basically doing a mash 150-ish and just doing like adding the hot water in to bring it up to 170, or are you fly sparging it?
Fly sparging it. Yep. Until I got the brew easy, which is more of a brew in the bag. So now I'll just bring the temp up to like 170, and well, same kind of difference, but yeah, I do like 15-gallon batches when I brew Berliner Weisse.
Well, you don't need to boil it, so you don't there's no risk of boil over.
Nope.
Right.
And it's
yeah. So that was the other, I guess I didn't mention that in here, but now, so when you're designing this in your recipe formation, if you're doing no boil, you need to make sure that you want to make sure that you are at the target gravity that you want in your mash out without boiling, right? Like you're not going to condense you don't want to end up with 7 gallons, 10 points lower than you want. So you need to, so I think most of, if you set your boil to 0 minutes, it'll adjust, but it's just something to remember. And then you can move it to a souring vessel. If you want, some people just sour right in their kettle. Doug and I don't do. Can
we talk about that real quick? So if you're souring in the kettle, you just keep your controller on a certain degree, right? Like if we, because I haven't done it yet, because I got my 3-vessel system. I'm probably going to do that soon. But we just keep the temperature on 100 degrees or so, and then
I think
the element kicks on and off. Is that?
Yeah, you want to recirculate it, I think, and I've heard that recirculating actually speeds up how fast the lacto works. But this is all anecdotal on the internet stuff. I'm just kind of nervous to have a fucking 240 volt thing just running overnight in my basement.
And that's what my thought was, because usually what I did, I put it in like a pot, and I put it in my firm chamber, and I just kept that at a certain temp. I'm gonna throw it in my boil kettle and then keep my element, I guess, going. But that's a good idea to recirculate it and think about that.
Yeah. And then you purge oxygen. I've done it with just CO2 out of my tank. Excuse me. And then I've done it with the wine preservation spray. And I think I've just not done it. And then you pitch lacto. So
the oxygen is more important for something, say like if you're using lacto from grain, right? Because of all the other stuff that's in there. But if you're using one of those other strains, then oxygen isn't that important to block from it, right?
I don't think so. I mean, I still do it sometimes when I remember. But especially like when using the wine preservation spray, I don't have it on me, but it's just like an aerosol can. So it's really small and it's argon gas. So argon's like a lot heavier than air. So like you don't need that much. Like you spray it in there for like 10 seconds and it's enough. So I just do it just in case, but I don't really think it's necessary.
According to Milk the Funk, you don't even need to do that. Like,
so
with the pure
they say
cultures,
oxygen's
right?
not even that bad for it.
Yeah, with the but if you're using like grain, then there's other shit in there that could cause that like baby diaper smell and taste, which is why they want you to like keep the oxygen away from it.
Right.
Using these pure cultures, I think there's not as much risk.
Yeah.
But obviously decreasing the oxygen is can't hurt.
there's Doug has a wine preservation spray.
How long does that shit last? Like how can that, let me see it, put it closer.
You can buy it at any liquor store.
Yeah, they have
It's
it at
argon?
It's argon and a few other inert gases, but they have it at Beer, Wine, and Hobby. I actually am like really interested. I just keep forgetting to do it. Of like doing a side-by-side comparison of a regular bottle, a CO2 purge bottle, and a argon purge bottle, and see if it makes any difference on like in a couple weeks if it would kind of impact like help prevent oxidation in the bottle. But kind of a side note.
If you're not pre-acidifying and if you have low hops and if you're pitching a low amount of lacto, you've got a risk of mold. So keeping oxygen out can prevent mold because mold requires oxygen too.
Yeah.
So just another reason to do it.
So then, so this, if you haven't figured this out, it's broken up over 2 days. So day 2, I don't know how long Doug usually waits. I've kind of noticed that it's like, so basically you can taste it or you can test the pH to see where you want it. I kind of find that it's one of those things, like if you do it enough, you kind of figure, and you're using the same strains, you figure out like how long it takes. But I approximately wait, and you'll see in a minute, I wait about 18 hours and start cooling it down. And then when it gets to the target temperature, pitch my yeast. If you are tasting it, you do have to remember that there is going to be a lot of residual sugar in it. So it won't taste as sour as the final product is because it's really sweet. So don't like keep waiting for it to hit that sourness you want. You just got to kind of figure that out. Doug, do you take the pH before cooling?
Yeah, I'm relying more on pH meter.
What are you looking to get it at?
3.6, but I think it gets down there pretty quick. I think the last one I did got to 3.4. So yeah, anywhere in that 3.4 to 3.6, I think is the sweet spot for it. Anything lower than that, it's not fun. You
Where do you go, Vince?
Yeah.
Where do you go,
like
Vince?
I used to go to around that, or when I used to test it, I used to go to that. And then, like I said, I just kind of got into the habit of like smelling it and kind of being able to recognize where I wanted it at. And then, so I just kind of open up, smell it and go, okay. And then go. The other thing is like neither Doug or I are killing it. So like it's going to keep going, even though it's going to go slower because neither Doug or I boil. So, it will continue just a lot slower rate. So it's not as big of a deal, but if you are boiling, you do need to be aware, like, okay, it's at where I want it to be. You don't want it to be too not sour or whatever.
So Doug, do you adjust that if you're going to fruit it, or do you kind of decide the fruit after it's done?
Yeah, that's a secondary for me if I'm going to fruit it or dry hop it or smoke Merita pepper it.
So you guys don't like adjust the pH level if you say this is going to be fruited with raspberries and it's going to drop the pH even further. You don't kind of think about that.
I talk about the way I deal with that is I mentioned this later is kind of I deal with that in the fruiting in that when you're doing very sour fruits, so raspberry, passion fruit, you need to balance it with another similar but sweeter fruit. So I do usually 3-to-1 raspberry to cherry, because at that level, people won't pick up on the cherry flavor, but it will the sweetness will kind of bring out the raspberry a little bit more. The one I'm drinking right now is actually raspberry and mango. Mangoes are very sweet, and it does a similar thing, but just adds a different type of tropical complexity to it. But I was going back and forth, and I can't remember what I ended up doing on whether or not to list mango in it. And there was previous competitions. I think Ross was judging my beer where I listed raspberry and cherry, and he said to me, and he was pretty drunk after it, so take it for what it's worth. He said that if I think I came in second that year, and he said if you didn't list cherry, I would have put you ahead.
What'd you rate him, Ross? What'd you give him for a score?
I think it was like a 49 or something. I can't remember.
Definitely wasn't a 49. I nitpick a bit more with those types of beers just as a judge. If you're going to list something in there, I'd better be able to kind of taste it. Otherwise, it's just not there. It's also kind of one of those things. We'll talk about this in a future session. Me and Mark are going to do kind of like a competition type of thing. But I personally feel that any style where you're adding fruit or spices or things like that, the hardest part is getting the balance right. And so you kind of, at least with me as a judge, you're kind of damned if you do, damned if you don't, unless you nail it. So
yeah, I have.
Sorry, Vince.
I have over-fruited beers before, and the feedback I get in competitions is it's not beer enough. So it is, and we talk about that in fruiting later. Is there any other things I'm missing to the process, Doug, that you do that's different?
When we're getting into adding adjuncts or something, or fruits,
or just
stuff?
Fruits we have later. We have the fruiting section, but
okay.
A quick question back there. A couple of things.
Yeah.
Can you guys talk to? You both don't boil. What are the advantages that you think you get from not boiling? And then you also had oxygen as being optional. Like, I guess, why would or wouldn't you do either of those two things?
I have a slide about the boil, so we can table that.
Cool.
The oxygen, I think, as DT kind of said, like I think that's a holdover from older, more traditional types of lacto that don't take on as quickly. I think the new lactos are super fast, and so it kind of just gets rid of the need of doing it. But I still do it just out of habit.
Do you not oxygenate for your yeast?
I don't. I usually it's such a low ABV that I just don't fucking even bother oxygenating at the end.
Yeah, lacto doesn't need it. Brett really doesn't need it. And if you're pitching a dry sack like a US-05 or 04, that doesn't need it either. So
yeah. So I usually just. So these are our vessels. How we sour, or how we sour. So I do it just in my firm chamber with a brew belt. Doug does it with a sous vide. I think Doug can probably keep his a little warmer. My firm chamber, the brew belt, can keep it probably at about like 85 to max, but it still works fine. And I don't know what you keep that at, Doug.
I keep it at 95-ish to 100, somewhere in there.
Yeah.
How
do you chill yours down then? Because you don't boil.
Yeah, I'll just put it in there and let it. An easy way is you can put it into a glass carboy without. Can I say this? I don't think you have to worry about the glass carboy breaking if you don't shock it with cooling it down too quick. So you can come out of the boil kettle and it's going to start cooling down. You're going to come into the carboy at about 130, let's say, and it's best to use something like immersion chiller or something to bring it down to that 90 degrees, I guess, is the safest way. And then you bring it into the glass carboys, and then I put it into that big bucket and put the sous vide in there, keep it at the temp I want, and then I'm not worried about oxygen getting in there, and I'm pitching the lacto blend. and I'm letting it go for 18 hours and expecting it's going to be ready at that point. Then I'm pulling it out of the, then I'm shutting the sous vide off. I'm bringing it out of, I mean, I could actually just add ice to it or whatever to try to, bring it down to the 60 degree, 65 degree temps. And then I'm hitting it with my built up Brett blend and USO 4 or 5, sometimes one of each, just to kind of see what happens.
So what you're saying, Doug, is just you open the lid for about 5 seconds and the Brett blend gets in, and then you close it back up.
Oh, I'm not worried about oxygen at that point, but I don't add oxygen either.
Yeah, and mine's just in like a little like mini fridge, but my mini fridge doesn't actually have a freezer chamber on it, so it takes a while to drop the temp. So like it'll take, I don't know, like 8 hours to drop it down or whatever it is. So I just, whenever I'm ready to go, a little bit before like when I think it's going to be done, I just set my fermentation chamber thing to, like pitching temperature and then drop it. And then I come back however long later and pitch. So.
Did you guys talk about the no boil? Why you do that? Is that just to save time?
Boom.
Oh, cool. I stepped away.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool.
My generation 1, I definitely boiled, but it was a short boil, maybe 15 minutes.
Yeah, that's what I did, about 15 minutes. I actually found when I was doing boils, it actually resulted in, and this is total anecdote, so, I thought it resulted in a crisper beer. But if you are boiling, you can do more complex hopping. You can cure your DMS paranoia. But then I found out, based on Doug's beers, that I thought no boil kind of gave a more bready and grainy complexity.
Yep, with the less effort.
the less effort's the key, right? Because you don't have to like get everything back out, like, so day 2 literally is like set your fermentation and fucking pitch the yeast. But there is no hop bitterness that you add to that. Like I kind of find that if you just drink it straight without anything else in it, it kind of tastes like sour apple juice a little bit. But I've never got DMS, so I don't know. I don't boil. I don't plan on boiling ever again.
Really? You don't think
No.
for just like the 60 minutes, just for the added?
No, we're doing 0 minutes and winning some awards.
I mean, like,
Okay.
I guess, like, if you're doing something like, I think Ross did a kettle sour, made a goza, right? Like, so if you're doing that, it makes sense. But, like, especially, like, if you're fucking fruiting it a bunch, like, who gives a shit, man?
When you say no
I'd actually
hop,
argue.
are you still hopping or not then?
I am not adding any hops to my fruited at all.
I'm not adding any hops. Round 1, version 1, I definitely had some German style hops in it, but to me, it was more like hops inhibit the lacto from souring, and lacto also drops the pH that you get tartness from that, and that kind of gives you the perception of bitterness that you would get from the hops. So,
Yeah, so if you are adding, so I think like most lactose are like up to like 8 IBU tolerance or something like that. I don't know.
So what about the thing that help the beer to not spoil? Is it not an issue because it's so low pH?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's just like fermented vegetables, same idea.
What were you going to say, Ross?
I was going to say, I haven't done a lot of it, sticks what it is, but my goes, I did boil it before souring and then after souring. But I'd actually think if you're worried about DMS, you're probably more worried about what I did, which was like a 15-minute boil, because for the SMM to fully dissipate, you're looking at about 30 to 45 minutes, depending what kind of malts you use. And so if you're only doing a 15-minute boil, you probably have a greater risk of some of that DMS coming through. But that's 100% to what you were saying, Vince. What I've read presentations, I've seen no actual experience. Mine didn't have any DMS in it, but
yeah. So yeast, these are the lists of yeast that Doug and I have used. 05 is just a fine one. 04, Mangrove 1015. So the one that I scored really well with, just for straight yeast, I used K97, which is Safale Kolsch. I think that's this one right here. I was doing a lot of research leading up to this year, and it seemed like winners in previous years had used 3711. which is this one here. So I split my last batch and did it. I was able to detect very little difference when I was bottling it, and so I went with the K97 because I kind of liked it a little bit more. Yeah, I don't. And the one note on this is I found that lacto, for whatever reason, inhibits krausen forming. So it might not look like it's fermenting very fast, but if you just pitch the healthy yeast in appropriate number of cells, you'll be good. I don't
You never
know.
had to do like a shock starter or anything? The
No, I don't
yeast
even
has
know what
always
that
performed
is.
for you guys? Well, it's so like it's to acclimate the yeast to the lower pH, right? I mean, I've never done it, but I've heard people doing it.
No, no, you don't have to do that.
The dry yeast is so like resilient, man. Like, just fucking throw it in there.
Nice. I like that. Just fucking throw it in there. We should quote that.
Yeah, and so Doug can talk. He can talk more about breath.
Yep. So, yeah, I put Brett in there. You don't Vince at all?
No, I've done Brett, but never in a Berliner.
Okay, so yeah, I love Brett. Everybody knows all my beers have Brett in them.
I love Brett.
So my biggest aha moment was just knowing that since I use so much Brett that I really have to PBW and Star San everything that I use, without, and then ever since then, my wits don't taste like wit Brett beers anymore. So you do have to be very careful with Brett in the brewery, but on my scale, I'm into it.
Oh, hey, Pete.
Pete's muted, I think.
Yeah.
but yeah, I like it. I think it adds a little more mouthfeel. Obviously, the using some wheat the oats is going to add a little more mouthfeel too. I think it just adds a little more character to a low ABV beer in general. It definitely helps attenuate it and bring it right down to a very crisp and snappy type beverage. So
do you use that? So you co-pitch with Brett, right? So you basically kettle sour, and then when that's done, you just pitch Brett and Sack as well?
Yeah, I usually do it at the same time. Let them go at the same time, and that's when you're going to start to see a little bit more of a krausen. Like Vince said, when you're just doing lacto, it's just these really tiny bubbles that you see that kind of rush up, kind of like a Miller Lite, champagne, just real tiny bubbles coming up. But there's no krausen that forms, no head that forms. And then once you put the Brett blend, in my case, and the USO 4 or 5, whatever you want to put in there, then you start to see a little bit of a krausen start to happen.
Do you
Are you looking for?
Go ahead.
I was going to say, are you looking for a certain lacto Brett to Sack ratio to manage the Brett character, or is the Brett going to express itself in the end regardless? It doesn't really matter.
Good question. You would think we've all messed around with Brett, and we're looking for the barnyard, like in a saison or something like that, a horse blanket type flavor aroma. But some reason with all of my Berliners that I've used a Brett blend in, so it's going to have different characteristics that would bring out those barnyard type flavors. I'm not getting that ever with the Berliner Weisse. It definitely changes over time. The longer you can let one sit in the bottle, a year, 2 years, you forget about a couple in the back of the fridge. They get more fruity, more lychee fruit, but never barnyard and horse blanket. So not quite sure what's going on or why that is, but.
Are you able to reproduce like with that, or does it just come out however it comes out? Like, are you finding consistency with that same Brett strain and not like measuring how many cells are in that, or is it kind of just does its own thing?
I definitely put a healthy Brett dose to it, like a lager type levels of yeast pitch. And then I usually just do 1 pack of a sack into it. Other than that, not too consistent as far as, like, I'll use different Brett blends, or I'll reuse a Brett blend that I have, you know, in the fridge. So the only thing
Like
I've
the
been
end
consistent
product?
about.
Is the end product consistent, you feel?
Yeah, it is. Yep.
And are you guys, I guess this is for you and Vince both, do you guys condition with sugar? Are you carbonating in the keg, like through CO2, or are you guys doing like
I've done everything. I've keg conditioned, I've bottle conditioned, I've force carbed.
Do you find that, like that, I know Doug, you do a lot of bottle conditioning. Do you find that you get any bottle bombs or?
No bottle bombs, but here's a one I bottled with carb tab, just a, you know, sugar tab, probably 2 months ago. So I'll crack this right now and see what's happening.
Oh man, that'd be so awesome if it just fucking shot.
Yeah, it would be amazing actually.
It's beautiful.
Hold it up a bit. There you go.
Nice.
That's, you know, the head's not going to last long, but it lasts as long as it's going to last. So
yeah. Yeah. So moving along, fruiting. It's kind of important to let the initial fermentation finish completely. You can move it to another one. I have just started throwing the fruit right into the primary. I do about 1 pound per gallon, but it depends on the fruit. And we talk about this, like blending fruit can help with complexity and express flavors. One mistake I once made was I just threw like 6 pounds of frozen fruit right in there, and it fucking crashed it down to like, like 30 degrees or something. So, just don't do that. I do use, if you're using carboys, I have one of these jarring funnels, and I use that to get it in there to create less of a mess. And then I do about 3 to 4 weeks. You on the fruits, you may see new fermentation. You want to see the color get sucked out of the fruit, and you want to make sure, especially if you're bottling, that secondary fermentation finishes. Do you have any other general on the process, Doug, for fruiting?
Yeah, good point on cooling it, letting it come up to room temperature, and then you have to be there with some kind of something to force the fruit through the, whatever funnel you're going to have, because it does take a while to get it into a 5-gallon glass carboy, if that's what you're using.
Yeah, I use basically a sanitized like spoon and just kind of ram it down in there.
So you guys pitch the fruit on top of the wort, on top of the beer, or do you guys pitch it into a different vessel and then kind of put it on top of the fruit?
I've done both. I'm lazy now, and I just put it right in there.
Yeah, I just leave it. Put it right in there.
Do you
No
try
transferring.
Do you try to store or mix it, or you just dump it in and let it go?
I just dump it in and let it go. I mean, it gets a little mixed because you're kind of fucking moving like 5 gallons around, but.
And then the fermentation's happening, and that's making things move around.
And have either of you tried fruit juice instead of fruit?
I have not. I've only done frozen fruit. So here's some photos of just like fruiting and kind of where it gets at the end. So you can kind of see like the raspberries kind of have the color sucked out of it, but I've never done fruit. And I've actually, or juice. I've never really, I mean, for Berliners, I haven't heard people do that too much. These are kind of the things that I see people do the most, but I don't know.
It's a little bit based on what kind of fruit you use. So I've done a couple of things with, like, you have pictures there of fruit where the color is pretty extracted out, and that's extremely fruit dependent. Like when I've done things with blackberries, even after a few weeks, and I've gotten a lot of flavor and a lot of color into the beer itself, like the berries themselves don't seem very different.
Yeah, you can see that with there's cherries in the lower right-hand one. You can see the cherries still have a lot of color there, but I don't know. How long do you leave them on fruit, Doug?
2 to 4 weeks.
Okay, yeah. So it takes a while. So like if you are doing for a competition, like these beers take, they take a lot of time in fermentation and then conditioning too, I think.
And are you
I
guys
did juice
taking
one
a
time,
grab?
and I was Sorry, I did juice one time, and I was pretty disappointed with the amount of fruit character I got from that. I think that whole fruit's definitely the way to go.
Yeah, I was wondering there because for a cherry porter, one recipe I'd seen talked about the cherry juice concentrate that I can find out at Whole Foods. That's why I wondered.
Yeah, I mean there might be ones. I have found success with frozen whole fruit. It's easy. Like I mean the reasons it's. I think everything you're seeing in both Doug and my process is we have coalesced around everything that is the easiest to do.
I think Dave, to your point, if you're making a Daka beer, because I did a stout with cherries, like fresh cherries. I think you need so much to kind of impart that flavor that it may make more sense to use fruit juice because you can add more for a cheaper amount. Like it's expensive to have, 10 pounds of cherries on 5 gallons or even 15 pounds. So if you're adding fruit juice to like a Daka beer, then it's, you get more out of it.
Yeah. But these are kind of the major fruiting options that I think people do is frozen fruit, very easy, but there are limited selections. It's easy to filter out. Fresh fruit is a pain in the ass because you have to, if you're doing cherries, you have to pit every one.
Yeah, but it feels good. It feels good picking the cherries, having your kids pick the cherries, and then, deep pitting them for 3 hours.
You know what also feels good? The knowledge I didn't do that. But there, you get more options with that. The one thing I really want to try, and if somebody's done it, I'd be curious to hear about, is the Goya frozen fruit pulp. I didn't finish my thought there, but there's they have a lot more tropical exotic fruits, passion fruit and star fruit, shit like that. But I assume it's harder to filter out. So if somebody's used that, I'd like to know about it.
Where have you seen the Goya?
They have it at Wegmans. Yeah, Market Basket has it.
Market Basket, even Star Market has some of them, but yeah, Market Basket is definitely your.
They're usually
maybe not right now.
They're usually not in the frozen fruit section. They're in the Goya frozen section.
Okay.
The Goya frozen section is patronizing anyway. It's awesome.
Yeah, the purees. We've talked about those on Slack. There's a lot of options. They're quite expensive. They're very hard to filter out. People have reported haze.
Free at Homebrew Con.
Yeah, I would say those are extracts though.
Oh, is that okay? That's what I thought you said.
Yeah, purees. And,
have you guys used purees? Does anybody give any feedback on that? Because I've never used them, but I've always heard negative feedback on them.
I think they make a lot more sense at the pro level and not at the homebrew level.
Okay, because pro brewers they swear by them and they get big pallets, but from the homebrew level, I always get there's a lot of negative feedback.
And then what Doug showed were extracts, and the benefit there is you can kind of add it to kegging, but some people say they have a chemical taste, so I'll take it for what it's worth.
What do you mean by extracts? Is it like in ethanol or something?
Extract might be the wrong word, but I don't know where I have it somewhere here. There's
a couple of brands of fruit producers that make fruit extracts specifically for brewing and beverage purposes, and they will sell you, quarts to gallons to.
Where is that?
Yeah,
1 second.
Basically, not distilled exactly, but sort of somewhat purified fruit extract intended for food process.
What do we have in there? I know.
So this is the new fancy one.
Yeah, I've got that
2015 farmhouse.
apricot amaretti.
Everybody got the grapefruit one at NHC last year. They make the coffee syrups and they've pivoted into beer craft purees. I haven't used it. I have 2 bottles of this fucking grapefruit at home. I don't know. I'm nervous to use it.
Kind of disturbingly as you let it sit on your shelf forever.
Yeah. Yeah, it's weird. I don't know. I'm nervous to use it and waste 5 gallons of beer on it.
I mean, my mom makes this stuff at home. It's like a plum extract, but it's like you pick fresh plums, like these are the little plums, and you fill a jar full of the plums, and then you fill it with sugar. And then via osmosis from granular sugar, the extract starts seeping out of the plums.
Oh, hell yeah.
So I've made mango extract and lemon extract that way.
I think that's it. That's kind of cool, actually.
But that's definitely different from the amaretti commercial pasteurized whatever. But I approve of you adding some of that plum extract to whatever sounds tasty.
Yeah, cook with it.
Is the extract?
Add it to some cider.
Oh, okay.
Is the extracts at that homebrew level, isn't it just like chemicals? It's not real extract. It's just like recreated flavors.
Yeah, so I mean, like this one here is like water, sucrose, dextrose, fructose, grapefruit, fruit food acids, citric acid, ascorbic acid, natural flavors.
Mm.
So I guess there's a benefit is that you could like just like dump it in the keg. I don't know. I haven't played with it, so I can't like the only thing I've done on here is frozen fruit and like I've done whole fruit before, fresh fruit, but not for a Berliner before. But that was it.
This is one you can find anywhere.
I've done frozen blackberries a number of times, and I recommend kind of against them because they clog up approximately everything.
Well, I have a solution for that. I'll show you in a minute here.
All right.
Quick question before you kind of jump out of fruit. Are you guys taking gravity readings to make sure that the beer is fully re-fermented with the fruit, or how are you guys making sure you're not bottling bottle?
I usually just watch it, and I guess I do check the gravity when I bottle it, but I've never got to. I guess I've never like hit the point where I've went to it and it was too high, and I've only bottled like once or twice. So
that is, I think that is a good question. When I've added fruit to things that were already fermented, it's ended up being just like 1 or 2 gravity points. So not quite enough to worry about. It's a little marginal. But bottles are strong enough that another point is not a big problem.
I don't know, Doug, if there's anything for dry hopping. I don't really think there's that much to talk about here.
Dry hopping, yeah, that was a 3-gallon batch. So that's a good amount of hops. And I did it just like it was going to be fruit, but I put the hops in instead at the same, it's about the same time. Just left it in there for, I think it was 3 or 4 days, and then I think I must have crash cooled it. I'll have to check my notes, but something to get it to drop out, and then I bottled the whole batch and did a carb tab in each one.
Yeah, I once dry hopped my Berliner with Azaka, and I thought the citrusy notes that Azaka gave kind of played well with the lactic. But yeah,
here's the dry hop one. Let's see how it sounds. Oh, that's a gusher. Off the laptop.
So
interesting that the dry hops have probably a little more sugar content than maybe the fruit did.
Yeah. For packaging, so what I do, Nathan, so I had similar experiences with raspberries. I've actually blasted myself in the face because it is clogged to pop it before, like a little piece of chunk of raspberry. So what I do when I transfer it now is I get a nylon strainer bag, and then I kind of put it on my racking cane, and then just use a stainless steel hose bar or tubing clamp around it, and then just clamp it down. And so in the fermenter, I basically filter out everything, so it comes perfectly clear.
I mean, I had a keg that I had. So last year I had a blackberry cider that I racked that way. I mean, the original keg got clogged. I racked it with a similar filter on the racking cane into another keg, and that one clogged too. So
yeah, I've never used blackberries, but I know raspberries break apart similar to blackberries. And so I started doing it like I showed there. I know DT has one of those bouncer filters, so that might be useful. But that might be too much to clog it. I don't really know how big it is. Or have you used that on fruit stuff, DT, at all?
I have not yet.
Okay, well, so that's another option, but blackberries might be a different beast. But with raspberries or any other fruit, I just recommend doing something like that just to keep it out. The style guidelines call for higher carbonation, so 2.8 to 3.5. I find that when they're really young, they have this like really heavy lacto or lactic flavor that kind of drops out, and the fruit expresses itself a little bit more. So I was actually kind of worried about mine being a little too young for NHC, but joke's on me.
So it's perfect.
And then I think like some fruits take longer to express. Like I found mango doesn't, like I actually won a competition once with a mango fruited Berliner that I didn't think tasted like mango, so I just submitted it as a traditional Berliner Weisse and won first place. But then like 6 months later, like I opened a bottle and it was a fucking mango bomb. And I know somebody asked about syrups on the side, but I've actually never used any of them. I don't know if Doug has.
No syrups. No, I haven't.
Yeah. So then the last slide that somebody's asked about was cleaning. I said don't fear the lacto. I think it's pretty easy to clean up. I think your regular cleaning process is probably sufficient, assuming it's good. If you do fruit, I think letting the kegs soak a little longer, maybe opening up and getting all the O-rings off there and giving them a nice scrub because there might be some residual sugars on them. And then for my draft lines, when they have fruit beer in them, I do a BLC followed by Star San recirculation, and I never had an issue with it kind of staying on. I don't know if Doug does Brett, so I think he could probably talk a little bit more cleaning stuff.
Yeah. So, I try to keep my Brett kegs labeled and just keep those with Brett beers in them, and then any plastics, I'll just replace the plastic without trying to worry about cleaning them because it's cheap.
Yep. So that is all I had. I know it went a little long, but there was a lot of questions, and I thought it was a pretty interesting and unique topic to talk about, and I have nothing to do most evenings. So this is what you got. Any other things that we didn't talk about that anybody's interested in, or any other experiences that?
Just a quick question, more on I really wanted to know, the no boil seems really kind of easy. But do you guys find it continues to get sour, or because the Brett or Sack consume most of the residual sugars and things like that, do you find that the sourness doesn't creep up anymore once you pitch the yeast?
I mean, like, I think it does get a little more sour. Like, I've had them, like, where I put the keg aside and then pulled it back out and it's a little more sour. But I also think there's a floor there, right? Like, it's not going to get to like 1 or 0 or something. You know what I mean?
Plus, it's cold at this point.
Yeah. So if you're keeping it cold.
Yeah, if it's cold, it's doesn't really have the ability to do what it loves to do at its temperatures where at the 100-degree temperatures or whatever. When it's down to 60, and then once you have it packaged, it's down to 30 or 40 degrees, whatever you keep it at. But yeah, that helps too.
What have you done for adding any spices with the fruits?
Well, I just did the smoked morita peppers and cocoa nib version. So that one came out fantastic.
Neat. And I guess how do you decide to how much to put in, trial and error, or?
Yeah, I was trial and error. I ended up doing a 1-gallon test batch on that one. So I just siphoned off filled up a 1-gallon carboy, and I put 3 smoked morita peppers, and then I put in some 0.7 ounces of cocoa nibs and let that ride for I don't know, until I got around to dealing with it, because it was just kind of one of these one-off things that I wasn't too much paying attention to. But probably about within a month, I bottled it into 6 bottles and tried it last night for the first time. And
the other thing, but
I was just going to say, I'll definitely scale it up. It was definitely worthy of scaling up.
The other thing I like about making these, so like I actually don't drink them straight that often, but I like having them on tap as like a blending beer for like, to oxidize my beer. So right now I have like a Trappist single and a Weiss beer on, and doing like 75, like 3-to-1, 75-25 of like the regular beer with that, just to give it like a little bit more flavor, and it's not going to be as hard. I enjoy doing that, but so it's like another nice use case of these just for your personal consumption.
Well, I have 2 questions. One is on topic, one is digressive. So I heard you guys mention US 05. And it sounded like there were particular yeasts that were good for this type of beer. Is that the case? That's the first question.
I think US-05 is perfectly fine. I've won a lot of medals with US-05 in this. I don't know what Doug does.
05, 04. Yeah, sometimes I'm like, oh, 4 might give it a little more English character or whatever, just because it's a low ABV beer. Maybe something just to spice it up a little bit. But
yeah, so that's why I kind of went a little different, and to spice it up a bit, I used the K97, which is the Kolsch yeast.
Yeah.
So then my second question is, this is my first time using US-05, and I noticed a tart but not sour flavor 3 days after pitching. Is that contamination, or is that normal? I was reading on some forums that that's sort of normal.
The pH will drop when you add yeast, but that's a very neutral yeast. So it should not add a lot of character to whatever you're making.
What type of beer was it?
It's supposed to be like just regular ale, pale ale.
Oh, okay.
It's also only 3 days into fermentation. So, I mean,
that could happen, man.
I mean, it hasn't had a chance to clean anything up. You know, it's like, seems really early.
Yeah, it was my first time tasting like that early. But I had also not hopped the beer. So it went 3 days without any hops. So I was just kind of curious. Well, thanks. I'll see if it cleans up.
Yeah, I think it probably, yeah, it probably should. I don't see a reason why US-05 would produce any sort of lactic. Any other comments on the?
Anybody else? Yeah, anybody else interested in no boil for other styles of beers?
Well, DT did a no boil IPA, so we got and EN did, and that's apparently a resounding success. I've never done anything else.
Ian's not on, but DT is. What do you got?
Yeah, I did a no boil Kvike New England IPA, and it was really good.
And Mark Pfaff was making a no boil Weiss beer, I believe. Recently.
Wit, yeah.
Wit, okay.
So we just got to cut this brew day down from 6 hours to 2 hours and no boil it all up.
Fuck that. Weiss beer, double decoction.
Come on, Ross, do that no boil somehow.
No, I'll definitely try that for my next sour beer, cattle sour beer. That I'm intrigued, but
yeah, it's super easy. No,
it's a lazy man wins way.
Yeah, I know, and it's I don't know. I've it's not my favorite style of beer, but I end up doing well in competition with it. So
I've been drinking a sour beer. I'm enjoying a sour beer. I should probably try to make a sour beer at some point.
Yes, you should.
I mean, these people are probably better than most of us, but.
Oh yeah, that's a good one.
Is that you, Dave?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, I haven't messed too much with sours, but the sours that I've messed with, like the kettles, are like is very not stress inducing when you know that like 5 IBU inhibit lactose, so you're not really stressed about what it's going to do to future beers. The Brett concerns me a little bit more, but I know Doug has kind of separate things now and keeping that all separate. But definitely, Nathan, if you haven't tried one yet, I haven't had any kind of cross-contamination with the lacto at all because
it just has I've never gotten around to making something that was intentionally sour.
Yeah, and I mean, I do the lacto in a I don't even do glass for mine. I do plastic, and I reuse those carboys for other things when I need to. So I've never had a problem.
So you know how the commercial breweries, well, some of them do it anyways, is they just put lactic acid in.
I was thinking of mentioning that, and then I was like, that's fucking stupid. I'm not going to do that.
I'm pretty sure Dirks got to the second round last year with that.
Not the second round. Honorable mention, best of taste. That was a Goza. So like Goza is a clean sourness, whereas Berliner Weisse, you can have some kind of Brett, some funk, some complexity there. So I don't know if it would do well for Berliner Weisse where you want a little more complexity, but did a Goza that way. I've also had a Berliner Weisse that wasn't sour enough to my taste, and I got it that extra little ways there with adding some lactic acid. You definitely want to pull a sample off and put it in drop Weisse to that sample to dial it in, because the lactic's 88%, and so it's real easy to overdo it. I think it ended up just being like, if I was doing all of the acidity from just added lactic, it was still just maybe 2 or 3 fluid ounces in a 3-gallon batch.
So souring Goza versus souring Berliner Weisse, is there much of a difference in process or technique?
I think a traditional Goza, you would still want a kettle sour, and it would probably still be better that way. I was just worried about over souring and knowing when to stop, because I haven't done this very often. And so I decided to do the blending to taste after fermentation thing, because then I could get it exactly where I wanted it. But it does end up in kind of a one-dimensional sourness.
And if you're going to fruit the hell out of it, that part doesn't really matter, and that's what most commercial places are banking on, because that cuts out the old lactic part. And really, I don't know if they boil it at all, but that really reduces the time investment into the brewing process if you're just getting your sourness from lactic acid.
Maybe Pete can comment on this, but I think most pro brewers actually have to make sure they add hops to technically call it beer. And so I've read Twitter accounts, people basically throwing a pellet in or whatever, because technically they have to be able to legally say they threw in hops because they only have a license to make beer.
I actually do consider my fruited Berliner Weisse some alternative.
And I always say I throw at least 1 hop pellet in, so I'm covered.
Pete, is that something true that's enforced by like ATF or anything like that, or is that kind of just like urban legend?
Urban legend.
Nobody will know.
Nobody knows.
I know. Get down there on Saturday for his no hopped IPA.
How do you do that? Doug and I have had many a discussion about this, and I've had a whole, well, not a bunch, but quite a few of his beers. I think he only brings me the good ones, but and the good ones are dry hopped, so you're adding hops somewhere. You don't have to. But I think on a pro level, I don't think we really care.
Nobody's calling you out or checking the recipe, or
they don't care. I've realized going into this how much they don't care.
Just pay us some money.
Yeah, they just want the taxes. That's it. That's it. You can call it whatever you want. There's lots of people that want to get into formulation and all that other stuff and get worried about it. I think they don't have enough heads going around going, oh, what's in that? No, it doesn't. No. Yeah, do what you want.
DT did post that there is another Cartman Labs yeast webinar going on to stream later or leave now. I don't know. You can do whatever you want. TT's probably, he's streaming it on your other monitor.
Oh, is it happening right now?
And DT is recording this one. And
Are you recording this?
DT is recording it.
Oh, cool. I was gonna post the I'll post the slides on the Slack channel so people can get it. But like I've said earlier, like just fucking read Milk the Funk. Like this is if you just go on their wiki, it has like all this information and more. You know, this might be a little more digestible, right? Like for, you know, an hour conversation, but if you just dive deep into that wiki page, you can learn a lot. So that's my recommendation.